At Firehouse Subs, a portion of every purchase helps provide life-saving equipment to first responders. We make our subs differently because our subs can make a difference. Like our spicy Cajun chicken sub with sliced, grilled Cajun seasoned chicken breast, melted pepper jack cheese, house-made Cajun mayo and jalapenos, all on a toasted sub roll. And it's only at Firehouse Subs. Click the banner now to start your pickup or delivery order.
Welcome to another Britflicks.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guests are Toby Meakins, hello.
Hi.
And Simon Allen, hello.
Hello.
You are director and writer of the new Netflix movie Choose or Die, are you not?
We are.
Apparently, yeah.
Do I need to square that with anything? Is a reference point that I've...
No, we are. Yeah, no.
We're still getting used to calling it Choose or Die. It was always called, it's been, since its inception, it's been called Cursor.
Yeah.
And they changed the title of the film deep in the end of post-production. So it's always...
Which was yeah, that was their decision, and we appealed the other way. I don't think it's controversial to say that, but we lost the appeal, but we're very happy, that it's out there, and nobody seems to care what it might have been called before, so that's all right. You know what I mean?
It did. I must admit, as someone that was aware of the project beforehand, it did throw me at first when I got the first email with Choose or Die in the subject.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting marketing thing, actually. If you make a film for I don't think it's just Netflix. I think it's a streamer now. I mean, it is all kind of like access and algorithm based, and also, Cursor. We used to work with Cursor. Like we used to write with Cursor, like you see in the game, like you see in the film. And using that on Twitter is difficult. Using it on Insta is difficult.
Oh yeah, no. I think there is. I mean, I think that the science of a cool film name has gone out the window because of the way the internet works. I mean, there's not a lot you can do about that. It's a real practicality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, my argument to Netflix was, look, using the film's tagline as its title, what you're doing, and they're like, tough.
It was worse. It was worse for me because we're not criticizing them. We're very, very grateful that they've taken the film on as an original and that they're putting it out to 190 countries or something. It's incredible. But we were very passionate about the title. It was always called that right through development. It was actually the first thing that we had. I came up with that, took it to Toby. He was like, well, what could this be? And we rolled it on from there. But we did get a day in court. They were very, very good, to be fair to them. And they said, you can make your appeal, come on. And there was this like mosaic of faces. And as Toby will affirm, I'm a pretty good pitcher. I love a pitch, right? So I spent like all afternoon like preparing this really cool pitch on why it should be called Cursor and not Choose or Die. And I thought I'll get a few laughs, and I know where I'll get them to cry even in a couple of... And it worked, they were lovely. They were reacting to it and everything. And then literally at the end of it, all these nodding heads, and then like, well, yeah, but it's going to be called Choose or Die. So, it didn't work. So, and they have a logic to it, which obviously we have to respect because they run the platform and we don't. And, and it has sort of what, I mean, already the trailer is nearly at 2 million views, which is incredible for something that's essentially an indie film. And I guess the clarity of the title, the fact it has a bit of a proposition to it,
and the word die tells you you're getting into a horror film more or less before you even think about it, which I think is crucial for getting the genre fans on board.
Well, you just call every horror film Die. Why not? Or Death. You know what I mean?
I don't wish to be that reductive, but you got me there, Simon. You got me there. Right then, before we get into too much detail, then, does one of you want to give a quick synopsis as to what Choose or Die is about, please?
Simon pitches best.
It's a retro 8-bit with attitude thriller about a girl and a boy who unearth an ancient text-based tape-loading video game from the 80s and discover that it contains a reality-warping curse, and it ends up presenting them with unthinkable, weird, surreal, and horrifying choices and challenges that they have to survive.
The Curse is a staple of a supernatural horror film, and I think that you do a brilliant job with that challenge. But before we get into that, I'd just be interested to know, because obviously you two have collaborated on other things before. This began life as a short film. I'm understanding that right?
Well, it's yeah. You go.
So what happened is we made a short film for Fox in the States called Floor 9.5 that went out in the ad breaks of they put it on Fox channel, and it went out in the ad breaks on Fox and blew up in America. And it was Simon and I, we did that together. Fox approached us. Rob Savage made one here as well, and the Bloody Cuts Boys made one here. But they made 12 films and they only picked 4 to be broadcast, and ours was one of the 4. Okay. And it kind of blew up on Twitter. And Matt Wilkinson, the producer that you know well, I approached him. He made that with us. And afterwards, it's like, look, we work well together. We've got loads of great ideas. Let's put something together and take it out. And that's where it came from.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was pretty quick because we had a meeting in Pizza Express, and we've been looking.
Was Prince Andrew there?
Prince Andrew wasn't there on this occasion, but he was. What was lovely about it was we learned so much from the sort of reaction to the short, to Floor 9.5, and from the type of storytelling. And we were pretty convinced, we were pretty ambitious about the idea of short form at that point, of trying to move forward the medium of short form. So we came up with, I had the word cursor and the idea of an 8-bit game and the idea that there was a curse in it and the play on words and all of that. And that's all I had. And I took it to Toby, and Toby, as he often does when I start with something like that, he'll add the bit that makes it sing, right? And he was the one that said, well, it should be, an 8-bit game from the 80s, and it should be menacing someone now, like somebody to whom the 80s doesn't mean anything. And from that, we got this idea of, okay, cool. So it's about that as well. It's about the idea that nostalgia in the 80s can be this sort of toxic supernatural force. And it really unlocks something. And then in terms of what happened with the project, I mean, we did a sort of pitch document, and Toby, because he's such a brilliant has such a brilliant visual imagination, put this deck together. And we had a bit of a bidding war, from every sort of production, well, a lot of production companies in the UK wanting to do it. We went with a company called Anton, who are still on board. They were the financiers of the feature version. We got Ridley Scott attached to it as an executive producer. He said some very nice things in a press release about Floor 9.5 and about Cursor and what we wanted to do with it. And we sold it. I mean, this is all very, very quick. We sold it to Quibi before Quibi really got going, to Jeffrey Katzenberg. So we went from making that short film for Fox for, I think, Toby, you did it for like about $8,000 or something, right?
Oh, it was $25,000. Yeah,
or something, to doing that to Ridley Scott, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Quibi, and we worked on it for quite a while, for about a year on the episodes. It was about 14 episodes, and there were very cool set pieces and things. And then, of course, Quibi launched.
I think we should just for history, for posterity's sake, we should say.
Yeah, so what's Quibi?
So a listener who's coming in who's not aware of Quibi, because it kind of came and it went before it ever came, really.
I mean,
so Quibi,
really,
Quibi were kind of it was the new Kool-Aid, wasn't it? So I mean, we really loved the idea because we thought, okay, look at Love, Death and Love, Sex and Robots on Netflix. It's one of the best things on Netflix, and we thought that that's what Quibi was going to be. The idea that you could take short form and really almost change the way that you make television and film now. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, they were and the unique thing was they were aiming for you. They literally were saying you're going to watch this on your phone. That was the kind of USP, wasn't it? They weren't pretending it was anything else.
And we worked out how to do this really brilliantly on phones as well. I really don't want to get into it but we worked out how to do this brilliantly on phones. And of course, I come from an advertising background, so I've been making content specifically for phones for a while. Do you know what I mean? And you know how to grade on a phone, and you know the way that the lighting works best on a phone and stuff like that. And you know how you can interact with phones. So it was really interesting. But what Quibi did was basically bought a load of feature films and chopped them up into 8 or 10 episodes. That's what they did. And what they turned this into, what they turned Choose or Die into, or Cursor into, as it was then, was actually quite a flabby feature film, but then we cut up into 14 parts because they applied all the same rules to storytelling.
Except that we did, I agree with that. Except that we did manage to hang on to quite a lot of what excited everyone about it in the first place. Because if you watch Toby's the shorts we made together, and particularly Floor 9.5, which I think is the best one, the efficiency of the storytelling is pretty amazing. Like how much it gets through in under 2 minutes. And what working with Toby as I have for so long, we've got a very kind of good shorthand way of thinking about narrative. And we really felt we were very passionate about the fact that we felt that with horror, so many horror films we find quite boring because the strategies they have for combining the supernatural and the kind of human story are always the same. Like there's always the girl that's being menaced by the ghost is always going to find the resolution around minute 79, and it's going to have something to do with her dad or something to do with her mum, or you know what I mean. You sort of know it's coming, and it means that everything in the story and the experience is reduced to a set of conventions, but also worse than that, to the idea that everything supernatural has to ultimately have a human motivation or a human agency. And for me, I mean, Toby and I talk about this constantly. The scariest things are the things that don't present themselves for the convenience of your comprehension, that they don't make sense, they don't compute. That cool thing in Mulholland Drive, the scene where he's in the diner at the beginning of the movie and he's talking about a dream he had, and then the dream, the logic of that, the dreamlike logic of it that seems to come from some other troubling, alarming place, was what we wanted to tap into. And we felt that short form was a really good way of doing it because you're not a slave to those narrative patterns that everything gets folded into. And that was what I think excited everyone about it. And you can still see vestiges of that in the film, in the way the set pieces are constructed. The film has 5 or 6 very, very clear set piece sequences. And I defy anyone to find set pieces as inventive as that, particularly on this budget and with these resources in any other movie. It's I think you can still see that kind of thinking of let's disrupt structures.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the films that I'll try to avoid spoilers. I mean, you could spoil as much as you like, but I'll try my best not to. But hopefully by what I suggest, you'll know what I'm talking about. I think that the laptop closing moment where we get to see another world, as it were, was a really inventive and efficient way. I mean, it reminded me, funny, I mean, it might sound like a crass comparison, but it reminded me of Jacob's Ladder, the way that the real world and the supernatural world coexisted.
It's really funny you say that. So I watched a bunch of films. In the October. We started writing this in October 2020, and then we shot in March 21.
Okay.
So, and in October 2020, as a feature, we turned it into a feature in October.
Yeah. I understand.
And that month, I watched a load of movies, and it was the last bunch of movies that I watched before I started making the film. And I didn't watch any movies while I was making the film either.
Yeah.
But one of them was Jacob's Ladder. The first act of Jacob's Ladder was a big influence on how this film kind of worked. Not only, but because of the way I love the way that it presented New York. It's kind of a desolate, broken, poor New York, and it's kind of like I really wanted to tap into that. But also, I love the way that they used the supernatural in it. It's really interesting. And there's a scene where the subway car's coming under, and there's just like a flicker and a ghost at the end of the or what he thinks is a ghost. At the end.
Yeah.
That's where he got the idea for the rat, because it was all like this was it was a good budget, but it was a constrained budget, and Toby was a lot of using Jacob's Ladder a lot as a reference for creating environments. But what you just said there about the laptop moment's a good example of how we work together. One of the things I love about Toby and the way his brain works, and particularly compared to other directors, is you can give him like a concept that's essentially, you can't execute it without like huge amounts of money, and Toby will find a way of doing it. And if you go back to the short Floor 9.5, the original idea for that was the idea of being followed from the front, right? It was the idea of a girl walking along, and there's somebody in front of her, and she stops and they stop, and she steps back and they step back, but they've still got their back to her, and then she turns, and wherever she looks, they're always like the same distance in front of her, right?
Yeah.
And Toby was like, well, let's do that in an office, and she needs to be in an office, and there needs to be an elevator, and he had, like, as he always does, makes these things work. And I remember saying to him, how are you going to do the turning from the front thing? Because I imagine you'll build like some sort of disc, right? And the camera will be on it. And he went, no, I'll do it on the cut. And I was like, no, that's going to be shit, mate. And he was like, no, I'll do it on the cut. And I'm like, no, that's going to be shit. lo and behold, he does it on the cut, and you've seen the film. And anyone listening to this should watch the film, because I think it's a really good example of this kind of thinking. And he does it on a cut, and it's better than, like, if you had all the money in the world and you could do the shot that I thought I could imagine that actually you probably couldn't do. It's better. And the laptop slam moment, which is, again, a cut and a clever piece of editing and all the performance and everything, it's a really good example of, I think it's fair to say, Toby, we like to do things physically, right? Tactically. And
as much as you can in camera, and then you kind of help it out with VFX when you need to. That's what we like to do. You know what I mean? It's like, it always gives the best results, in my opinion.
You really sort of eke out the provenance of your horror. You don't, there's no, I think, looking at your production notes and kind of what you said already, it's sort of, I've seen enough horror films where we get to the point we have to go to an expert who says, oh, this is because of, the old ancient, whatever it was. And
we have that scene. We have a version of that scene,
but it doesn't help into your opening half of the film, though. Doesn't need, you already know enough.
Oh yeah,
you're not using it It isn't just the solving all the mysteries. What I mean is, like, you've already taught us through what you've seen what's going on, and the way that it resolves itself doesn't feel like that conversation was the solution, because it was still down to Kayla to work out what to do next.
I mean, that's Toby all over, though. That's a good way of us working, isn't it, Toby? Because I've done sort of, a few years now, and I'm like you, Stuart. I came to writing professionally quite relatively late. I was in my mid-30s when I started, about 10 years ago. And Toby is always, he's very good on it. I will always try and put those scenes into things because of my TV background. It's sort of the stuff of television is to explain, and Toby's always pushing back. And it's come full circle now, because there's people I'm working with. Obviously now we're making shows for like big platforms and so on, and they're more cinematic. And you're now getting Toby would always say when we work together, that's a bit TV. And now people in TV are saying it's a bit TV. You know what I mean? Completely. But yeah, so it's kind of weird. But exactly as you say, and I think that fits in with what we were saying a few moments ago, that we really do prefer supernatural experiences to be genuinely supernatural, to not have human motivation, to not be easily explained. They're much scarier, and that's much more like what a supernatural experience is.
An obvious reference for Curse is obviously Cast in the Rune, M.R. James, and I believe that the pair of you are very much influenced by Mr. James.
Yeah, no, we're massive M.R. James fans. In fact, we've had a short version of the Haunted Doll's House, like, that we've wanted to do for, like, I don't know, 15 years now. David Morrissey attached to it for a kind of short period of time. It was like as part of a scheme, and they didn't give the horror film the thing. So and it's really influenced. It's really influenced this film. I mean, like the whole idea of using an 80s computer game is tied back to the antiquity of the cursed object in an M.R. James story. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if you're a kid now, the 80s is as ancient as the 1870s are to when we were kids growing up, in a funny kind of way. You know what I mean? I mean, it's scary, isn't it? I think song 2 is 25 years old now. Like that's insane if you think of when I was growing up.
Toby, it is more years now going back to when Nevermind was released than it was to the 60s from when Nevermind was released.
Oh, fuck off. No, I hate that. That's horrible.
And so you look at this stuff and you go, in fact, I've been having an interesting conversation about it on another project that I've got. When we talk about film and when we talk about kind of older characters, we always end up in this mindset that these people grew up or were adults in the 70s. And of course they're not. If you've got like a kind of 50-year-old guy now who's your antagonist, he could have grown up, he would have been a teenager in the 80s. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And at the moment, that's not changing film language, and it's going to have to start because for the kids watching it now, it kind of means nothing. The amount of times I've said to the runners or the production assistants, "Hey, have you seen Withnail and I?" And they go, "No," and I'm like, "Oh, go and see it. It's brilliant." And they come back after the weekend and their precious time off and gone. Yeah, I watched that movie. It was fucking shit. You know what I mean? Because it's like, how can you say that? Do you know what I mean? It's genius, but it has no relevance at all to them. Do you know? It really,
it's the same. It's exactly the same with like again, we were talking, Stuart, about being a bit older coming into the industry, and everyone I started working with 10 years ago was in their 20s, and now they're in their 30s, and I was bewildered by the fact that they didn't know what the movies were from that era, or didn't care, right? Because we think these things are touchstones, the Goonies or Lost Boys or whatever. And for a lot of people they are, but for an awful lot of people they don't mean a fucking thing. And if you encourage them to watch those films, you don't get that reaction, because so much of it is embedded in whatever your relationship to that movie was in that era and that time, and they've got their own era, And
again, this really ties into what we were trying to do. Curse or Choose or Die. The sacrilege of the 80s. How we treat nostalgia and how we treat the 80s, like it's this incredible place that all of this incredible stuff came from, and one, was it really? And
it two, was. It absolutely fucking was.
Of course it was for us. But two, it's like for for a generation Z or Z or whatever you want to call it, like it means nothing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, their grandparents had fun in the 80s, not even their parents. Do you know? Like, that's the world that we're living in.
You do. I mean, it's wonderful part of the opening sort of 5-10 minutes when we meet Kayla, that she is the voice of that generation you're talking about, which is, what are you talking about? And I thought, and the crucial scene, and this is not story critical, it's just a lovely little gag, is where Isaac does his impression of Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. He calls her a bitch, which obviously was a kind of catchphrase for Freddy Krueger. But obviously in 2022, you call anybody, least of all your peers and female peers at that as a bloke, a bitch, you're asking for trouble.
So here goes, Stuart, as a fellow writer. And Toby, actually, to be fair, this isn't Toby's fault, but the bitch thing, yeah, you're right. It's the actual, where I got that from was that my daughter loves Rick and Morty, right?
Yeah.
And Rick and Morty have got this fantastic piss take of Freddy Krueger called Scary Terry.
Okay.
So you should watch it. It's hilarious. And it's like, 1, 2, Scary Terry's coming for you. And basically, Rick and Morty are evading this kind of total Freddy Krueger ripoff who has like forks for hands or something, and they make a joke about the fact that, and so it can't be, can't breach copyright. And he comes after them, but he says bitch a lot. He's always like, you can run, but you can't hide, bitch, and prime time, and all this stuff. And at one point, Rick says, God, he sure does like to say bitch a lot, doesn't he? And that's what the reference was to that. It's the Isaac character is sort of doing that kind of approximated version of it. And then at the end, at the end of that scene as it is in the movie originally, he does do the really nice line where he says, you know where that reference comes from.
Yeah.
A bitch. But then I think at one point after she walked out, and Toby shot it, and it was really good. Asa did it really well. He said, help yourself, bitch. And he did it in a funny voice. And it was funny that the younger execs at Netflix, number one, I don't think a lot of them understood the reference, right? So they did just think he was calling her a bitch and putting on a funny voice.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
Yeah, and the second bitch, the second one, and the compromise that Toby got was to take the second bitch out. The second time it happened, and, but it's a really interesting. It'd be really interesting to see what people make of that moment, and whether they do get it, or whether that is a Generation X joke. Only. Do you know what I mean?
Without knowing that, but seeing it as it is in the cut, and knowing the reference, it worked both ways for me, because obviously it's Isaac, the guy who can't get the girl. Ultimately, the payoff is, is there anything you like about me, kind of thing, like all the time with him. So you feel that he's fought, as much as he might have offended her in any way, he's just failing to pull her, as it were, and that's all that's happening. It's just another way that he's failed. And I thought it was just a nice way, because
I think it's really rich territory when you're doing these kind of things to have references and play on people getting them or not getting them, and then try and think about whether the audience get them or not get them. Because sometimes something that clearly isn't an insult or offensive could be misread as such, and then you could be aware of that or not aware of that, and so on. So I'm really, really glad that landed with you. And and I think again, Toby, I mean, you could talk about it with Asa. I don't know what Asa actually did. Asa get it Toby, when you shot it?
Yeah, no, well, he got it completely, and you know, Yoda was really cool about it as well, actually. But of course, the thing about their relationship, and the thing about the Kayla Isaac relationship is that he almost is a throwback because he's such a retro geek himself. He's almost like a throwback to the 80s himself, and she is so thoroughly, in my mind anyway, in the way that we try to play it, so thoroughly kind of now, so thoroughly kind of modern, and hopefully that kind of comes across. You know,
I wrote in my notes. I'd said that there's a real edge to the relationship because of Kayla, because you can see that there's not a natural. She doesn't need his approval, which is obviously a progression from where we've been before. You know, even as recent as 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been an obvious thing to try and make. You know, it would have been about her getting his approval in some way, shape or form, despite whatever the horror would have been.
The scene at the beginning of the diner with the waitress, you know, there's a deliberate flirtation that happens between her and the waitress. And you know, people of our generation might not get it so much, but a 25-year-old female watches that and boom, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Because she said, I don't mind if you want to stay around, but my boss is going to go bananas. So clearly they were kind of hanging, as it were. But
yeah. So it's kind of like there's a connection between the two of them. And in fact, Joanna, who was cast as the part, she brought that into that wasn't written. It wasn't written to be played like that. Her casting tape, she pulled that.
Can I just rewind a sec? Because we've talked in big strokes about what you did to pull the film together. But I'd be interested to know, from a collaboration point of view, about nailing the provenance of your supernatural, because it was the thing that got me. It was such a, I mean, especially where we don't want to spoil it by going and where it ends, but from beginning to end, the concept just holds together beautifully and grows in a really natural way. The way you feed us information, but in terms of that beginning step where you're going, how do we do this kind of our supernatural world? Because you're at pains to point it out in your production notes that you didn't want to go down certain roads. So what was the challenge for you two as collaborators in terms of designing that provenance that was using the old technology, but bringing it into ancient thing, which is the unknown supernatural?
I think it was with, and Toby did a lot of thinking on this actually. And Toby actually wrote an episode when it was a TV show that explained the curse, right? Yeah. And where the curse came from. And Toby was really, really good on this very early on, because we always find we have to work everything out. Like even on Floor 9.5, we have to have like hours and hours and days of conversation about the mythology. And even if you don't see all of that, you know, because the film or the story you're telling is a keyhole on that.
Yeah.
And with this, we had to do that as well. You know, we had to work out where it started before the curse was put into the game by the guy. You know?
No, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
And we worked all that out. We know what that is. It's all written down. There's a really, really good episode that actually would be a prequel, I guess, or whatever, that we could do something with at some later point. And then it's all about like, how little of that do we need to give you? Because again, when you think about it, when you think about Jaws or Alien or anything that was properly scary in the kind of analog world that I think we're talking about, those movies from that era, you didn't know a fucking thing about the supernatural threat. You didn't know a thing about like The Shining, which I still consider to be one of the scariest things ever when you see it when you're 14 on a black and white TV and, you know, 2 a.m, which is, I think, the perfect way to see that movie, by the way. You know fuck all about it. You don't know what the hell it's got to do with anything.
Which makes it even more scary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you were really good, Toby, because I tried to, because I think by this point, because I should say that Toby was the driving force behind seeing this as a film, right? Toby was the one that was like, okay, the Cribby thing's dead, but this could be a feature and I'll show you how. And he was the one that took the episodes and put them together and sent them to me. And like, look, it almost works. You just need to do a bit of this, that, and the other, you know,
okay.
Which was amazing. But it was Toby, you know, the lazy writer in me, who's kind of got, you know, other projects or whatever, was like, okay, well, do Peter. And he's like, no, we need to know. Like, we need to work all this out forensically. The audience doesn't need to know, but we have to know. So we know what we're not doing, right? We know when we don't do something or we don't explain something, there's a confidence to it. But so I think that's the point. We there was a lot of work, a lot of writing, a lot of documents, a lot of episodes of when it was a show, and a lot of scenes as well that were pared away, but kept, so that Toby, when he was telling the story on the floor, you know, in a really difficult circumstances, COVID and everything, if there was a question from the floor, if there was a question from one of the actors, he could answer it. He knew what it was. And I think that
you need to have that kind of confidence to say as well. Do you know what I mean? Especially with the level of quality of cast we had on it, you can't say they instantly know whether you're bullshitting or not. Do you know what I mean? It's like you have to be sure of what you're asking people to do, and it becomes really important, especially in something where because some of these set pieces are kind of quite tricky to shoot.
Yeah.
You're asking them to stretch themselves, and they've got to understand that you understand exactly what you're doing. It's a fascinating thing, actually. The hardest thing in terms of the writing process of that, though, was deciding when we could start to move the game away from a screen, and how often we had to bring it back to a screen, and how we could take it out into the real world.
Okay.
I mean, that was my thing, because again, the first pitch, I was like, you want to make 8-bit text like a supernatural presence. You want to make that our Jaws, that. And so the original scripts were full of it, and I was particularly keen on doing something with transcript, moving from sort of text to action and back again, and seeing that kind of strange transcription process occurring and then being reversed. And I found quite a good way of representing it on the page. I used a different font, and I would have a sort of baton pass between written text on the page and then dialogue and then scene direction action. That was quite I think, again, that helped sell the project, because it read really dynamically and it really involved you in the events on the page. But as Toby said, and this comes from hard-earned experience, because he's made so much cool stuff and, stuff that's had to communicate really quickly, it will get really fucking boring, people looking at screens. And I always remember thinking, oh, fuck off, mate. What do you kind of like, oh, they leave it in there, it's really good. And then actually, like, the number of times in TV shows where I've realised that, like, I've worked on a couple of spy shows, and people looking at screens gets really fucking boring really quickly. That's why when you watch the Bourne movies, the camera's all over the place. Because it's so. But there
are kind of exceptions there, and you do learn. So there's a scene in the film when Asa first starts kind of playing the game, and it's in the trailer, so it's not giving it away. And as he speaks, the game types out what he's saying, even before he says them.
Yeah.
Now on the page, I was like, this is never going to work, and we shot it, and it was like, I was like, before I was shooting it, it was like, this is never going to work. It's going to be, crap, quite frankly.
I think you said, I'll have a go at it.
Oh yeah, I said, but Asa was so good. Asa was so good, and it's, that's what bringing talent to it does. Asa took it, and the wonder of what was happening. He really portrayed that beautifully, in my opinion, and it made something. It's a really difficult thing to do. Do you know what I mean? Because essentially, what you're doing is saying words, and I'm shooting somebody, and I'm shooting them coming up on the screen. And to give that a little bit of the magic that he gave it, I just in the edit, all the way through the edit, it's like one of my favorite bits of the film, because it's like it's something that's so simple, and all that's making it work really. It's good acting, to be honest, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's and again, but this is going to turn into a parade of compliments for Toby, but it's that thing of he loves it. No, it's that thing of being given a really difficult to execute idea that and then finding a way of doing it that's really elegant and simple. And in the end, the baton pass from a screen to somebody's voice, basically, and because you directed him and he found that tone and everything, you get this really complex idea that this thing is somehow in tune with him, with him, and can manipulate things, and it's scary, and you don't really know what it's doing. The tectonics are shifting, and you get the whole thing from just the tone of his voice. It's amazing. So,
yeah, I mean, there's another sort of actor versus screen moment, which I thought was really effective, and I guess would have helped with the production budget as well, which is when Kayla's got the rat and her mother's sequence. It's
well, you'd think it'd help with the production budget, but it's actually one of the most expensive things in the film.
Go away, you're joking, Toby? Really?
No. Like, seriously, lighting. So it's a big empty space, and lighting big empty spaces and making the work. So, and it's a night shoot, and it was two night shoot days.
Right.
So it wasn't the most expensive thing in the film, but it was really interesting. Actually, they tried to get me, because of budget, they tried to get me to change that location a couple of times. And dug my heels in, because the one thing that we've done with all the shorts is find a great location and make stuff work within it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's what we did. And it was the deal with this. It's like, Simon's got a lot of showrunning experience. He knows how to structure a story. We trust him with that. I'm good with set pieces, but to make these set pieces work, I need this, 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 and this. And one of those was great locations. And that location was expensive. Lighting it in there was expensive. Shooting, like, just the whole thing, shooting was expensive, extraordinarily tiring. I mean, the crew went on over. The crew, it was an overtime job because it was the nights, it wasn't extra. It wasn't like double bubble because it was nights or anything like that. But I think we went over. So yeah, in theory, it was cheap, but no, not at all. And of course, the technology, you'd think that it's. We had a really great kid on the shoot called Ted, who basically designed all the game. He shot everything live, right? So, like, hardly any of those. I think we ended up comping quite a lot of the screens back in, but everything there was for the actors to react to.
Oh, really?
So it was all done live. Yeah, and just the cost of that, the cost of running that. So Ted was there playing the bits of the game that Yola had to react to as the game was playing out in front of her. And Angela Griffin, to her credit, was in we had to build a soundproof wall inside the corridor of this kind of office building, so that she could scream and it could come through an earpiece. So she was earpieced at the same time. It was an incredibly complicated, like, I know it looks really simple and really effective, but it's actually a really incredibly complicated.
No, I'm grateful for you unpacking it, because I mean, obviously, I didn't use the word cheap. I just meant cost less.
No. So no, I mean, the cheap, like the cheaper scenes in the film, I guess, were actually the sets that we built.
Okay.
Like, once you build a set and you've got a week in there, you're kind of all right. Do you know what I mean?
The acting level is, I agree. I think it's one of the most effective sequences in the film, and it was the model for that initially, at least, was the scene in Alien. Sigourney Weaver and the team, they're in the console room, and Dallas is out in the corridor, and then all you really see of Dallas's fate is this sort of pulse on like a motion sensor, and it's so analog and old school. You don't even see him get eaten by the alien or anything, and it's all about what you don't see and what your brain fills in. And we thought that we could take that further and do something with 8-bit graphics, with representing something that's absolutely unimaginable, like a fucking monster rat or a rat king coming after this woman in her apartment. You don't see any of it. You just hear it and you see a kind of graphic representation of it. But I just wanted to come in on something, because I know you, Stuart, you talk a lot about process. One thing that Toby will have a lot to say about this. One thing that I found incredibly useful with my writing that Toby taught me, actually, was that when we made the first short film that we'll probably admit to, right, which was about 22 years ago, called The Magic Mile, and Toby shot it on Super 16mm in Canberra. We had this idea about it's just literally what it says on the tin. It's a mile where miracles happen, right, on this remote beach down in the south of England, and but the miracles don't last beyond the extent of this mile, right?
Okay.
And it sounds again, it's a bit like Cursor. It's an idea that came from the title. You're sensing a pattern here with me. And again, Toby's first thing is like, well, how am I going to show that? How are we going to do this? And I'll never forget, he found this location. He said, you come down here, we'll look at it. And we walked a mile on this location and found these groins, those sort of fence-like structures that jut out into the ocean. And we organised the story and the sequences in the story around when the character that we follow reaches those groins, so that we could clearly show you when this miracle starts happening to her, a midpoint, and when it ends, right, when it abandons her. And I've never ever forgotten that. And I've always used the physicality of going to a location, going to a place, whether you're lucky enough to be on something that's greenlit and you can do recce's and you can walk around with the director and you can plan and plot around spaces and how characters will interact with real geography, or whether you just do it off your own back if you're working speculatively or in development or whatever. It really does help, because it gives your writing a precision, and particularly if you're trying to build drama, suspense. Those things are all about geography to some degree. They're all about where someone hides, how far it is to here. that old adage of it takes a long time to walk across the room is true. I read so many scripts, get sent so many scripts to work on shows and stuff, and it really does take a fucking long time to walk across the room, right? It's like there's so many boring, like you've not thought about where this is, what they're doing there, and Toby is an absolute master at constructing story around real spaces. I think. Wouldn't you agree to, like, that's the last compliment now, right?
No, I'm not gonna call myself a master. It's just, I think it came from, it's a craft thing. I did a lot of work abroad when you turn up to a location abroad with DOP and you're given a foreign crew and you've got to make a commercial with a foreign crew with the space they've given you, and you fly it in, you wreck it, and you shoot the next day, and then you go into another country. And by doing that, you learn a craft. You start to look at it, and you start to look at spaces, and you start to think, how do these spaces get used? How can we use these spaces in the right way to get the most drama out of it? And it's just, you take those rules. All the rules that I learned from doing that, and all the experience I learned from doing that for 10 years, I brought into this, and it's that simple, really.
It's surprisingly not common in the industry, like, that writers think like that, and it does change it. Like I was a showrunner on a season of The Musketeers, a show for the BBC, and they'd already got this beautiful set built, and they looked at me like I was fucking insane, because I got out there and I was literally acting out the action set pieces in the set and going, it'll be here, and then this horse comes out of here and this guy jumps out here, and they're like, what the fuck is this guy doing? And that's Toby's fault. But
except that Simon always makes it more complicated than it needs to be, because
whatever. Here we go.
And they can say these 5 lines there.
Yeah.
No, let's just cut the lines. Just needs to stab up.
That's true.
You have a choice between a red door and a blue door at some point in the film, and I just wondered how much of that was a sort of nod to and Mickey take of the red pill, blue pill element, given obviously the computer notion that hangs over this, and obviously the idea of real worlds and virtual worlds that exist in your film.
I mean, for me, I don't think I was that plugged into it. For me, I thought I was being more Lynchian than kind of
really.
Matrix. You know what I mean? But maybe that was just the state of my mind at the time.
I always remember with that one, it came from, we had, when it, again, so to that, but you talk about story and process. So, it was a TV show before, and a short form TV show. And there was a level game, one that Toby had come up with, that was a game based around a location. It was based around a nightclub.
Yeah.
And we made a thing in the nightclub of red light and blue light. And it was really cool. We used music in a really creative way. I think that would have been quite a groundbreaking sequence, actually. And you got like a list of tracks, didn't you? Like 80s tracks, and bad things happened. You had to choose between different 80s tracks. And
we had the whole budget for the entire film.
Yeah, it would have fucked us completely. But so I think it was the red door, blue door was a hangover from that. But it was a chance to get a bit of levity into the story. To have that lovely bit with Asa where he says, never pick red, and then of course there's something horrible behind the blue doors. It's like, red's not so bad, red's cool. Like red's okay. That was quite a nice moment. So yeah, it was, and I think it was more David Lynch in terms of, the weird things appearing behind the radiator all of a sudden and all of that, just these two doors appear and you think, oh shit, so yeah.
No, I mean, look, it all felt like very much like a continuum, because obviously with how effective the laptop closing bit does in terms of what's possible, without needing to explain it. I just thought, everything was possible from that point on, because Layla's clearly not in control of what's going on in her life anymore, apart from the choosing or dying. That's it. That is hardwired into her moving forward, which is, which is wonderful. And you gave me a segue there, so I'm going to use it because you mentioned the word music, and
wow.
And obviously, but in comparison, and thinking of a film that really did utilize 80s music, Adam Wingard's The Guest, and he got in a whole host. They spent a lot of money, obviously, getting like Front 242 and Love and Rockets and whatever. But you kind of, you get the best of both worlds. You've got Liam Howlett from The Prodigy doing the score, who is of the time when the game is from, but also has a career that straddles to this day. What's the process there in terms of when you've got because obviously you've gone through this period, you've gone through this development, which is this Quibi TV series, to then squeezing it into what you saw as the film. So then when you've got the film, at what point is he making the score? Is this after the film's all done?
So this is how it worked, right? So the Music Super came on, and I think it was in December, and we were talking about music, and I was like, look, I fancy. So with everything with this, the first impulse that everybody said, whether it was design, costume, hair, was like, oh, so is it all going to be set in the 80s? And I'm like, are we going to tap into that constantly? And I'm like, absolutely not. The 80s is the antagonist. You know what I mean? Nostalgia is what we're fighting against here. So this is set now, and then when bad shit happens, that's when we can reference how the kind of 80s feels. So we were talking about bands and maybe getting like a kind of they'd send me a bunch of bands that wanted to start getting into soundtracks, and he said, look, on the off chance, I know Liam's looking to do a score. Like, should we talk to Liam? And I was like, well, fuck, if Liam wants to talk to us, then talk to him. I think it was in December. We had a Zoom, me and the music supervisor, his manager, and the producer. And I spent a lot of time doing the deck for this. The deck, months of work went into the deck, and I think it's one of the reasons why the film happened in a very kind of way. I sent it to you. It's like, I've been told by everybody in the business that it's really kind of good pitch deck, like a good director's lookbook. And I sent him that, and he was like, yeah, I'm really up for this. Like, give me a bit of time, and I'll send you some stuff just to see if you like it or not. And I never remember, I thought, we all hung up and we were like, that was great, Liam's never going to do this, you know what I mean? So I remember, you got to remember at that time, it's a low-budget English indie movie. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? We're asking, like, it's like, why would he do?
You're asking a big rock star to do it, yeah.
Yeah, you're asking a legend to do that, right? Like, nobody attached. And literally, I think we were Christmas came and went, and we were going into pre-production in January, and I hadn't heard anything. And then just out of the blue, Liam Howler sent me like 4 tracks. Like 4 tracks turned up in my invoice, and it's like, literally, what do you think of this? And I sat there for like 25 minutes, and there's all this stuff going on. I'm pre-production on a movie. It's like fucking mental. And all this stuff's going on, and I'm like, oh my God, like, I couldn't open them because I'm like, if I don't like it, it's basically, I'm going to have to say, I don't want to use Liam Howlett, you know what I mean? Which is just insane, And what he sent was basically 4, it's about 7, but it was like, I think it was 4 and there were variations. It was basically 4 soundscapes. That's what he sent. He sent us over 4 really cool, dark kind of drone is the wrong term because it was bass soundscapes. And they were just extraordinary. And it was like, wow. Like, how can you have distortion? It's almost clean. It's like, it's like, it blew my mind, actually. And so from that point, what he did became part of the DNA of the film, because I used them on set, Like, I used that, I played that stuff on set when we were doing stings. And then when we got into, what happened then was we got into post, and we started needing stuff. And it's like, look, I don't want to take this off the internet. And Liam was like, look, I'm ready to start working. Liam started basically scoring the film at like week 5 of post, basically, which was great. And at first, it was the biggest joy of making the film for me. At first, what it was he'd send some stuff, go, oh, how about this? What do you think about this? Where do you like this? Maybe this will work here. And then we'd put it somewhere else and send it back to him and go, look, we think it works here, but if you don't like it here, we can talk about it. And then he'd change it up. And so at first it was very organic, because it's his first score and it's my first movie, so we're almost like learning together.
Oh wow!
And then by the end, it's fantastic. And we once I understand, the thing is that nothing of his is, it's sampled obviously, but nothing's computer. Like, he doesn't take a fixed computer sample. Like, he'll play a kick drum and then he'll sample that. He'll do it live and then he'll sample that. Everything is kind of organically created. You know what I mean?
Handmade, right? Handmade.
Yeah. The amount of work that's gone into it is just incredible, really. But what happened is, as we were going further along in the journey, he began to be able to express himself more in the way that he was trying to express himself, because because he was found his feet. And also it got to the stage where, you know, you get into the end of scoring a film and it's like, you know, you're playing with frames. Do you know what I mean? You're playing, I need this to hit here, I need this to hit here, I need that to hit there. And it just kind of happened. It was brilliant. Up until the very end. Go on.
I just remember when Toby sent me the title track, and he knows, because you know, we did talk a lot about the score before he got Liam, which was, I couldn't believe it when he got Liam. I mean, the first thing when he got Liam, I just wanted to, I tried to get Toby to do the thing from Poison, you know, the beginning of Poison, that track where you hear the phone ring and Liam Howlett goes, "Fuck's sake, trying to write this fucking tune, man." I said, say that to him. But he still hasn't done it. I just, the sort of 80s-ness of the track, the sound, and this is a game where Toby has incredible, another compliment, look at that, where he has incredible instincts. You know, my instinct was always, it's going to be a real kind of synthwave throwback score. And in fact, what you did was something much more interesting that had sort of notes of that, but it was still quite contemporary. And I'll never forget, you sent the title track, which is on the opening credits, and it's so gnarly and analog and brutal and evocative. And I just heard it and I listened to it about 50 times over and over. I couldn't believe it. I love it so much. And it's the kind of music that I would listen to.
Yeah.
And that was so wonderful.
It's really interesting. It really tapped in. So we had some very good sound designers come on in the first place. And like I had to change them quite late on in the process, basically because Liam's sound is so organic feeling. I know it probably doesn't feel it when you listen to it because it's essentially electronica, isn't it? It's like, you know, but this, obviously we created the game sound, and the game sounds, it wasn't fitting with what Liam had done. And so I got this guy called Steve Brower came on kind of really late in the day, and he's like he's brilliant sound designer and an analog geek, and he kind of understood the project and like immediately. Don't get me wrong, these other guys they were doing the top draw sound designers, but it was like Steve just tapped into what Liam had done and kind of complemented it in a really, like, he just understood. You know, it's just one of those things. It's just like this guy understands what Liam's done, and therefore he can complement it in the right way. And that was a rough run to the end there, like getting the sound that done, because we would, like, what he turned around in days at the end of the process, Steve, the sound designer, was incredible. But it does make it hopefully it gives the game a real voice, and hopefully it makes the whole thing feel like it belongs in the same world. You know what I mean? That was very kind of,
yeah. And I think, that's always an important part of if a score has to be sort of be a character alongside everything else. It's sort of, it's got that role, hasn't it? If it's doing its job.
I mean, sonically, basically, Liam laid the groundwork for the whole film. A lot of the sound design in there is stuff that Liam created that we took, that we just said, can we nick that, Liam? Please, can we use that? You know what I mean? The sound design work on the actual film, as it turned out in the end, was mostly giving the game a voice, which is kind of fascinating in itself. Actually, that was a lot of fun. And of course, that's the other thing. Like designing the game, that was done 3 years ago as well. You know, that's the same person who did the original artwork for the game, came on and worked all the way through and delivered the graphics for the game over the course of 3 years, which was great.
Given circumstances have changed over the last couple of years due to a pandemic, and also you making a film that ended up being released on a streamer, can you talk about that process of discovering how your film is received, as it were?
So, I mean, it's kind of fascinating and scary and nerve-wracking all at the same time. So, Netflix, we made the movie. The movie was made independently. It was deficit financed and made independently. And then I think we got to the stage of the director's cut, which was about 10 weeks in. And a trailer, it was a trailer, and the script was sent out at Cannes, and it sold from the trailer and script.
Yeah,
which is incredible in itself.
Indeed.
And then
I've got to put this on the record for posterity. He phoned me. I was at an air show, right? Like, what a dad thing to do, right? It was a fucking air, which I hated. I hated it. And I was watching a Spitfire go over, and he phones me, but Netflix had just bought the film. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. And he goes, no, Netflix had just bought the film. And he did also tell me how much, which literally I was, which he can't talk about, but I was like, okay. I'm going to go get some beers now. And it was unbelievable. It was just an unbelievable thing. Yeah. Sorry, Toby. Go on.
But all of a sudden, what you're doing is so I come from a commercials background, so the budgets that I've been working with were better than the budgets that I made the movie for, right? I mean, like per minute, a lot better. And the crews that I was working with, don't get me wrong, my crew was lovely and beautiful. My HODs I've known for years, but a lot of the crew were a lot more inexperienced than the crews that I'm used to working with. So you kind of like change your whole way of thinking about stuff. Making a movie a little bit because you're making an independent movie for less money. And then Netflix buy it and come on, and they want, quite rightly, to have a say in the movie. They bought the movie, they're execs, and don't get me wrong, they've been like really, I can't stress how good they've been throughout, but they had notes, right? And all of a sudden and also it's a Netflix movie. So there's an expectation in terms of VFX, in terms of grade, in terms of sound. Like you're not making a film for the festival circuit anymore that you're hoping to, you're making a net.
I understand, yeah.
So again, you have to switch your perspective and go, okay, so we've got to do this in a slightly different way now. This has got to run in a slightly different way, which was a process that we found difficult our end, because obviously the budget hadn't changed. We were making an independent film for Netflix, but the budget hadn't gone up just because they bought it. That's not the way. That's not the way.
But it's true that they, and you're right. You would expect them, particularly for what they paid for the movie and their ambitions for it, which are considerable. They wanted to influence it as much as possible. And what often happens, and Stuart, you'll know this, and listeners that are either starting out as screenwriters or whatever. You often get, in a situation like that, you get things that sometimes are more like script notes than cut notes. So we found, that because they want to influence it so much as if it's just started, but in fact, Toby had made it and there'd been this director's cut, and it kind of, to an extent, fundamentally is what it is, right? Unless you're going to reshoot, there's not much you can do. And so a lot of the things suggestions we were getting, apart from specifics about cuts, were ADR, and you were talking earlier about the mythology and so on, and how much you explain and how much you don't explain. And there were a lot of suggestions for ADR lines, and we wrote quite a lot of ADR lines, didn't we?
We recorded a lot of ADR.
We recorded like loads of them, and in the end, to your credit, you tried a lot of them, and poor old Asa Butterfield, I think I wrote one speech for him. You can see it in the film, where to him trying to get through about 2 minutes worth of dialogue in 45 seconds. It's always a fun thing to watch, right? But in the end, you ended up taking most of it away. I think that's fair to say, using probably about.
But it's a lesson. It's kind of like, and again, you learn this experience. It's not, you learn this working for clients in a professional industry. It's like the point is that nothing's wasted. You go in and you try it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But provided that you can show that it doesn't work, or that you've tried it to your best ability, then people are generally pretty good in their lessons. You know what I mean? Mm. So that's kind of what happened. But it made the process longer, and it made the process more expensive, which is interesting in itself. But anyway, so we get the movie finished just after Christmas, and we're hoping for it to go South by Southwest. We wanted to go South by Southwest. Because originally we were heading just before Netflix bought it. We were heading towards TIFF. Do you know what I mean? That was the thing that we were going for.
Yeah.
And but Netflix they just don't want to do that. They just don't want to have your film. They want to keep it for themselves. Do you know what I mean? Which you kind of understand the logic of it, actually, if you understand marketing in a funny kind of a way, right? I think, But from a directing point of view, from a filmmaker's point of view, what happens is I delivered a film in kind of mid-January, like final completion happened kind of by the end of January. And then you wait for a few weeks to find out when it's going out. Like you don't know what's going to happen to your film. And then you find out that it's not going to get screened at a festival, and it's going to go out in kind of April. And then so you're like, okay, fine. And like, it's going to go out in kind of April, but then like it's almost been like silence. Do you know what I mean? It's almost silence. Yeah. So you kind of sat there, kind of going, "Oh my God!" We did a few test screens, so we know that it's not. We know it's a good film, but you do a kind of test screening, so we know that like how audiences reacted to it, but you're still kind of like, you just don't know. And of course, there's a press embargo, there's a day-and-day press embargo, so you don't really know what the press have made.
I would say that's the one thing that we do miss, because with the great joy of making the short films was always, watching them with a festival crowd and seeing people react to them and so on. And that, with this one, we're not going to have that. For all the huge benefits of it being on Netflix, of all the streamers on Netflix, they have the biggest reach, the biggest platform. The sad thing, I think, is that we've been in test screenings and seen people react to certain critical moments, one or two of which are in the trailer, and they react with unanimity. They react, they jump at the same time, they cry out at the same time, and it would have been nice to have had a bit more of that if it had gone into cinemas and so on. But then, an indie horror film trying to find its way, meander its way through the cinema circuit, it's a lonely journey, generally speaking, isn't it? I mean, even if there's a lot of buzz around something, it can usually doesn't really, 9 times out of 10 doesn't translate into lots of people actually seeing the thing, So, because the noise is one thing and the reality, as the box office numbers show, is quite another. But so we won't have that kind of communal experience with this, which is a shame. But on the other hand, 210 million people can watch it if they want to instantly.
No, it's a kind of it's a new normal, isn't it? In a way, so it's kind of like it's unusual in terms of what your expectations might have been, but actually, it's becoming a normal, isn't it? In the way that films are, Richard Linklater film just appears on Netflix. You're kind of like, oh yeah.
From our point of view, I mean, we're obviously proud of what we've made, but also it kind of raises the question is, like, and I sound a bit like a twat for saying this actually, but like, what does success look like when obviously what we've done, we made an indie film, we sold it for profit to Netflix, and it's going out to 220 million people, and the trailer's at 2 million views and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you've made a successful film, but it's like, what does success actually look like? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it raises that question from a filmmaker's point of view, like how do we know if the film's successful? Like,
well, it's not going to be a tree falling over in the forest, is it, that nobody hears? There will be a reaction, but I guess it's going to be, in a weird way, it's in the way you tell the story of how the film came about, with all the different avenues you went down before it became a film. In a way, you're going to receive the sort of feedback in a similar fashion. It won't all land at you in where you expect it. It will get. I
know, and that's just like when you come through a certain, it's just. I don't think I prepared myself for that. I didn't know what to expect. You go through this huge battle to like this war to make a film, and then you come into it, and it's like you're kind of like, what now? And it's like, even with TV, there's a build to TV. Do you know what I mean? But this is literally it's gonna land, and it's exciting and scary at the same time. But it's also like, what do you believe about what you read when it comes out and stuff like that? It's like,
I suppose you can only have your first film once, can't you? You can't do it a second time. There's no,
which I'm quite pleased about, actually, because I'm like.
Well, look, the one thing I haven't mentioned, and I'll just very quickly because we've mentioned Ace, we've mentioned Lola, and they obviously are, Lola is Kayla, the star of the film, as it were, and Yola. Sorry, my own handwriting. Sorry, my mistake. Can you talk about maybe favourite moments with both Asa and her? Sort of did something with what you were expecting, where it went beyond, and you were like, no, that's what they should do. Where can you pinpoint any moments in the shoot where they brought their characters to life beyond your expectations?
Well, I think I talked about one earlier when Asa was reacting with this with basically text on the screen, and he made that come alive in a way that I couldn't believe. And with Yola, God, she's so brave. I think that's the thing that struck me. Like, she goes into that water at the end of the film. We had like a minute and a half of her underwater, closing her throat with her mouth open and her eyes open. Do you know what I mean? She learned to do that in like 2 days, and
no way.
Well, obviously there's divers, and like it's those kind of moments where you realise that these people care about so much about what they do. and getting it right that they're prepared to do. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Like, none of the crew could believe it. I think we left a whole. I mean, we were pushed for time, obviously, the whole time on this film. One of the things that we did was demand. I mean, you've seen the film. It works at a pace, right? That was always the intention.
Oh no, it goes along at a hell of a lick.
Yeah, there's too many, in my opinion, there are too many kind of like horror features that are made for small budgets that just meander along because they've got no choice but to meander along because like the schedule and the budget has forced them to do that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like really, and we wanted, you know, if you think that there was 6 big set pieces in there, we had a 6-week shoot. That's 1 a week plus everything else in between. Do you know what I mean? It's like it was pretty full on, and like her keeping that level of concentration and being in it. You know, she's basically in almost every single scene. The whole time was taxing and hard, and she came out of it the other end. You know what I mean? It's like it's a difficult, tough thing to do, and like the bravery of that. I'm quite astonished by. I mean, Asa Butterfield, technically, I've worked with quite a few actors now, and technically he's incredible. Like, as an actor, his craft is impeccable. It's like, yeah.
It was when we cast him, we were, because obviously, as Toby said, it's an indie film, and it was deficit financed. And obviously, as you will know, Stuart, from doing this yourself, deficit finance means there's all these dependencies, like you need to get this type of actor, you need to do this, you need to do that. And we were told in no uncertain terms that if you get somebody like Asa Butterfield, then we'll greenlight you. And then Asa Butterfield reads it, he sees the deck, and the deck is incredible, and he watches the shorts, and we get a call with Asa Butterfield, and we're told, you know, you're going to, if you do this call, you and Toby with him, and if you get him, you're greenlit. So there's high stakes on it. And again, I was believing over preparing. So I had prepared this pitch, you know, like expecting to have to kind of woo this guy and persuade him. And he pops up on this Zoom in January 2021, I think it was. And there's all this gaming shit in his room, like, and he's got the gaming headphones and he's got the gaming chair and all that. And literally, I was like, "Oh, it's going to be fine. He's going to do it." And he did it. You know, he was into it straight away because he's a gaming enthusiast himself, and he understood a lot of where it was coming from and what it was talking about, and he connected with the character and thought the character was fun. So, you know, it was getting him, I think, was such a big thing. And then Iola, finding Iola was amazing. Yola, sorry, that's Stuart's fault. And then Robert, you know, Robert was we sat and talked about the game. There should be a voice on the prize line. It should be somebody iconic. And we did a wish list, and top of the wish list was Robert England, and Matt, our producer, who is amazing at just saying, well, until you ask, you don't know. Put out the feelers, asked, and within, I think, a couple of weeks, you were directing him on a audio session. It was incredible.
Yeah, and he was actually really influential with the film. Do you know? Because he read the script, obviously said, I don't do a lot of stuff that people send me, and I get sent an awful lot of stuff. And I think this is great. And he said, make sure, I mean, I hope you feel that there's some levity when you watch the film, that we really didn't want to make a bleak horror movie. Do you know what I mean? Mm. And he was like, make sure there's some fun in it. Make sure that you have some fun with this, because, you know, you can have fun with horror. Like, I'm pretty dark, and Simon's quite light, and that always kind of well, it works really well, doesn't it? Because it kind of hits each other and go on, and we find a thing. But you know, whenever we were going like that in terms of like how dark or how light it should be, I remembered what Robert said, and I think the balance of that hopefully comes across really well. I feel, you know, that we're not just going doom, 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 doom. It's like
you're a long way from Snowtown. Don't worry. I don't think you're in that neck of the woods. I mean, it is. I must admit that is because of the pace you go along. I think the way I describe it is like you've made the 35-minute album, so to speak. You've gone, this is what we need. We don't need anything else. It's like there's no need to just, because we can fill more space. We should fill space. It's like I get the feeling watching a lot of films that there's more could be taken out to make it a better film, but because it's there, maybe there's affection towards something, or something cost a lot of money, it'll be left in, but it won't be to the better of the film in the end.
Yeah, and also you've got to trust your editors on that score as well. Like my first editor, Tommy Boulding, he went off and made a film of his own called Hounded after the director's cut. And fortunately, I was lucky enough that Mark Towns, who cut Censor and St. Maud, came on from the point when Netflix came on. So the guy's got studio experience because he did The Ritual as well and stuff like that. But also, he is, his films aren't long. It was like, let's cut this down. Like this is a ride. Let's make it a ride. And I think it is. I mean, sometimes, in all honesty, I think that on a big screen, I think that it could be 30 seconds longer. I think we could hold the beats a bit longer. But for the platform that it's going on, I think it works really well. Do you know what I mean? On a smaller screen, you can cut quicker on a smaller screen. So, you need to hold it a little bit longer on a larger screen, which is kind of interesting in itself. But this is a thing that filmmakers are going to have to start to decide. If you make an indie movie now, like you really do have to think about where you want it to go. Like because the way that first acts are structured for streamers, the form is changing. Do you know what I mean? They want people to stay watching their movies, and no matter what, unless they buy a movie outright, they're going to play with your first act to get it as tight as possible because they want.
No. The expression "give it 20 minutes" doesn't exist in some vacuum, does it?
No.
People are doing that. Sadly, are doing that now. It's really frightening. It's
no, and well, it's kind of frightening, but also you've got to take this stuff and look at it as an opportunity, right? So you kind of say, okay, so how can I write a film where I make an impact in the first 20 minutes in the first act and still not destroy my story or destroy what I'm trying to.
Well, look, Toby, I feel we've barely touched the surface, and yet we've talked for over an hour together, and I'm very grateful for your patience giving me that much time, you two. It just gives me to say congratulations on People Die, and thank you very much for giving us your time on the Britflicks podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
The new Macy's Backstage opens Saturday inside Macy's Easton Town Center. Here's the deal. Our name says Macy's, but Macy's Backstage has totally different finds at incredibly low prices. Think the latest looks, home decor, toys, and more, all for less. Plus, Star Rewards members earn on every purchase except gift cards, services, and fees. So join us Saturday, April 23rd inside Macy's Easton Town Center at the new Macy's Backstage. Off price, on trend, arriving daily. More at macy'sbackstage.com.